Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. Today, we are excited to be joined by Joe Henderson from Deposco, and we are going to be talking about omnichannel fulfillment and some of the challenges that companies are facing in this area. Welcome, Joe.
Ellen, I am so glad to be able to come on the show today. You and I have spent so much time working together on various marketing activities. It's nice to actually get to participate in one for once.
I know. Usually we're behind the scenes. Today we are front and center. I am really looking forward to our topic today because it's an interesting topic, I'm sure. But let's take a quick break and get to know you a little bit more. So, if you were independently wealthy, if you went out and bought, what is it, Powerball, whatever lottery has a huge jackpot this week, and you never had to work again a day in your life, what would you do with your time?
Because I mean, that's the easy one, right? That's the one most of us spend all of our time on. I mean, who hasn't thought about this? So my stock answer to this one has always been, I am a huge history buff at heart. I'd probably just go back to being a full-time student, academic, maybe even be a professor, but something that just really allows me to just go dive into my books all day instead of having to come to work. I mean, I love understanding the science behind my job. I have a background in statistics and mathematics, but at my core, I'm fascinated by Japanese history, specifically that period you call the Warring States period. It's just one of those fascinating periods where individuals' actions, their army's exploits was somehow larger than life. You know, the period was epic in the truest use of the word. So I would love to just be able to focus on my passions instead of chasing the dollar like all of us.
Would you go to Japan and
Oh, absolutely. You just said I'm independently wealthy. Nothing would stop me, right?
Exactly. But would you go there to study, or would you go there to sightsee, or would you master thesis project when you got there?
I think all of that, but not in the I want to be transplanted way. It's always fascinating to appreciate geography and cultures and the backgrounds that led to them. But at the end of the day, I am an American. I love where I live here in Phoenix, and this is where I want to stay. But it's always good to go travel and see and experience things.
So it's funny that the Far East is where your interest lies. My best friend is also, she left her original career, went back to school, got a double major in anthropology and history, studying China and Mongolia. Inner Mongolia, outer Mongolia. There's two different ones, and I don't know the difference. But she wants to go live in a yurt for a year.
See, you had me right up until the last part where it's like, oh yeah, study and this and visit and experience. Oh no, too enamored with my creature comforts.
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. She's working on her master's now, and she wants to be a professor as well. And she's not letting the fact that she's not independently wealthy stop her, which I think is just amazing. I don't have that. I would read books. I know that I would study things, but I don't know that I have a specific area that I would go back to study. But I would enroll in a college and just take whatever course.
Well, exactly. You can ignore your course plan at that point. You can ignore everything else and just do what you want.
Whatever interested me in that moment is what I would study. And I'm sure that whatever university I did this to would be so fed up with me. They're like, are you going to do something? No, just take my money and let me sit here in class. That's all.
See, but that's where the fed up ends, is take my money.
Probably. Oh, goodness. All right. So today we are talking about omnichannel fulfillment. And so I looked this up. The word omnichannel didn't even exist until the year 2011. Isn't that crazy that something that is so pervasive in our industry today has only been around a little over a decade?
I think this is where we get back to meanings and concepts. I don't think the concept's new. And that's something that really importantly distinguishes that we've been moving in this direction since the 80s. You can start saying that like globalization, some of the overseas manufacturing, the introduction of international business as a main channel is really when we started shifting. We didn't have a name for it, but it stopped being manufacturer, distribution center, retail store, and that was literally the only path path you had. So I think we just really started progressively labeling it differently. First, you have online, you had catalog, you have stores, and even online, we've really failed to appreciate that only opened up to the broad public in about 98. So we've only really had online as a focus for the last 25 years. As I worked into traditional distribution, it was all about multi-channel transformation. It was like, oh, I need to have internet, and I need to have catalog, and I need to have a retail store. And I've been doing that, like you said, up until 4 or 5 years into my professional career. And then it was Omnichannels come out. We've taken multi-channel transformation and we made it into Omnichannel. And we had to continue to rebrand it because words mean things. But I think this natural progression of consistently addressing the customer where they wanted to be addressed, that has been a theme that's really been in business for the last 30 years. We've just relabeled it as it became more specific, and it became an umbrella for a lot of interconnected concepts and technologies.
Of course. And so those consumer buying practices, I mean, we know that the past 4 or 5 years have been monumentally changed. But I mean, you're talking about even before that, some of the buying practices had changed. What are some of those bigger changes that we've seen in the past, let's say, decade? That way we include a little bit before COVID and, of course, after.
And I think what you see there is really, again, the customer driving the whole process. You said about the last 5 years. Let's just nail it on the head. It was COVID. Suddenly, the thing where people would occasionally go to the store, occasionally buy online, we were still seeing that shifting over time of more and more people buying online. Just say it, Amazon was a thing, and it really drove a different kind of consumer preference. But then COVID came along, and you've required everybody but essential workers to stay home, even if your preference was 50-50. It now be maybe 80-20, it may be 90-10. Suddenly the thumb was on the other side of the scale. And what that did was just accelerate something that was already happening. Now you had to scramble and go, do I provide this as a would be nice? Well, now as a firm, it's a provide this or die kind of concept. Can I deliver things to people that I couldn't deliver to before? Greatest example is fast food. You just spent 50 years specializing in, you're going to go to the store, I'm going to go to the counter, or I'm going to go through the drive-through. And you did not mess with that since 1960. Now suddenly it's like, wait, I have to do DoorDash? I have to actually put things into different styles of packaging, different configurations. I need to start being creative with, do I keep this food hot? And so there's a lot of things that suddenly fast food was like, wait, we haven't been asked to change anything for 50 years. Now in 5 months, you're having to fundamentally transform your business or die. And then there was the misallocation of risk of that decision. So for example, if you're McDonald's, okay, you still exist on every single corner. You could probably fudge this a bit and be fine. But when you start talking about mom and pops, local shops, local eateries, I think that they were really disproportionately impacted by that change of suddenly, oh, I built my entire thing about my one brick and mortar store and serving my walk-in customers. If I do not make this transformation, I will not be here next year. And so it's really interesting to see that this change, this trajectory of history also was not equally impactful. There were a lot of different companies that were impacted disproportionately, and it was almost always inversely related to their size.
Right. Well, and even aside from COVID, because of course the restaurant industry suffered significantly during COVID when people just weren't going out to eat, or the restaurants that did stay open didn't necessarily have that DoorDash setup. They didn't have delivery. I mean, I managed a pizza delivery place for 7 years. So I'm familiar with that concept, and that was part of our business plan and part of our structure. But the other types of businesses that don't include that type of planning into how they're going to get clients, how they're going to serve customers, they don't know how to do it. But even after COVID, after lots of businesses went under, that's still a incredibly prevalent piece, that last mile delivery of getting your product to your customer. And people don't always consider maybe restaurant retail to be part of the supply chain, but it really is. Last mile delivery affects that just as much as it affects Amazon or Walmart or any of those other larger brands. So in terms of brands responding and some of the implications. So we're talking about restaurants. What about some other companies? How are they responding to these shifts?
And I think it starts with, because we said it's all driven by consumer preference. I think it's necessitated a different focus on technology. You're not thinking about, do I just acquire a WMS anymore? It really is this for a distribution center? Is it for a fulfillment center? Suddenly something that was a broad generic term and it just was like, check the box in your evolutionary journey. Now you're having to put a lot more thought about what is the actual purpose of it? Do I have that sub feature function set that really hones in on my business, my targeted clientele, and is built for purpose, especially when I think about the large enterprise systems that we were implementing on-prem. Suddenly there was a lot of bloat, there was a lot of features you never needed, or you were acquiring feature 2 because you were going to use it in 6 years when you got the revenue goals you were looking for. So I think that whole selection of technology is where I've seen that biggest change. Now, then you think about what we're dealing with right now, where we've got a little bit of the economy slowing, a little bit of pressure from the banks when it comes to interest rates. There's now becoming an increasing conflict between the finance team and the operations team. Operations team goes, I just need to accomplish this. I need these feature functions. Good. Finance goes, but do you need them now? Can you wait a year? Are we going to be okay if you just, because they're thinking cash flows, money in the bank, giving maybe the interest rates will curve and they don't want to be at the peak when they buy a 30-year loan. There's a lot of different ebb and flow right now between those that are trying to meet the customer's needs and those that are very due diligently trying to protect the company's best interests and their longevity. And so we're seeing a lot of these cycles get drug out because of that. A lot of finance and accounting people, a lot of capital expenditure experts being pulled into these bids to say, the payoff curve is no longer 5 years. The payoff curve could be 8, could be 10. And that directly influences a lot of considerations like, when are you going to be in the black if you're a startup? Maybe how appealing are you to buyout if that is your chosen trajectory? A lot of these things like the balance sheet can be silently weighing down on the business and completely altering the trajectory of these companies.
That's true. That's true. So, sorry, we're going to need to edit this pause out. Sorry, I have to read the notes. Your notes are very, very, very long. They're very thorough.
Well, I can go into the extra bullet points too. We're like 2 in.
Sure, yeah, go for it. So what? Okay, one of the things that you said is that sales cycle is longer. Mm-hmm. Other than finance, is there anything else impacting that where they're saying, okay, let's take a deeper look at this? Are there additional business units or additional aspects of those companies that are impacting that sales cycle?
Well, let's start with that operations team. So one of the things that I've run into personally is that the whole buy the monolithic suite and you'll have it in 3 years. I work for Starbucks, Oracle, OBIEE. It is absolutely essential for these multi-billion-dollar companies. But when you bring it down market, you start talking to mid-market, you start talking to emerging into low enterprise. And a lot of them are like, oh, I'm going to hand you a check now. It's going to be 3 years before I actually get something out of this. And they're beginning to push back on that. You're starting to see people coming in, call it tier 2, tier 3 even of technology provision. And their whole promise is speed of delivery. Can I give you this 1 to 2 things? Can I do it really well? And can I stand it up tomorrow? So we're seeing this shift of the whole tech stack. Now, you may grow up into these big enterprise glue together style systems, but right now what we're seeing is a little bit more of tech agnosticism. Some of the way that you can improve that buying cycle is to focus on one thing. So instead of going to your finance team and going, I'm going to go with Bob's monolithic software. It does WMS, OMS, and Julian fries. And the finance team goes, well, how can I do due diligence on that in a reasonable amount of time? So now they're going, we've got a sales cycle with the WMS. We've got a sales cycle with the TMS. We've gone out and done rate providers. And we exist now in SaaS-based technology that can go, okay, now that I have all these things, I just integrate them and they play together. So people are focusing at the sales level of, let's do one thing, let's do it well, let's do it fast. Now I open up my API, I open up my data, and you can invite and cross data between all of these different platforms. And now you build this bespoke, very nimble supply chain that does exactly what you need to when you need to do that acquisition. So I think a lot of brands are just finally comfortable with that whole business, or the bulk of it is now moving to those direct channels. When I came up in supply chains, they were highly optimized around the distribution center. I have my suppliers, I restock, I then put it in inventory. I have safety stock. I pull it, I replenish it, I put it on a truck, I restock it to the store. Being able to look at how a supply chain is optimized around that is generally around truck schedules, delivery cadence, every day, every other day style replenishment, and really filling the front of the house. So when everybody's shopping on their phone, replenishment is now based around them. It's not about the retail customer. They're still important, but we're still experiencing a little bit of that showroom concept of you really are just coming in to look, and then you just pull out your phone and you order from Amazon anyways. So I think a key focus of this has now worked it into the RFX. I need things that make me e-commerce, that make me omnichannel, that make me direct to consumer. And I need it now. I don't need it in 3 years. And ideally, I want to do it in the exact cadence and feature set that I want. This helps with working capital flow. This helps for companies to grow faster because they're not overbuying, but they're still razor focused on what is that customer profile that I want to serve.
Sure. And so with some of these companies that provide these software and these IT solutions, are they? I'm sorry, we were talking about restaurants a minute ago. So now the term in my head is a la carte. You know, each of these little pieces that they can get one at a time as they're needed, as the customer grows their business and they're able to add on these additional functions. Are we seeing a shift where companies are going back to those original vendors and adding on the things, or are they cobbling together a Frankenstein supply chain solution that's going to meet all of their needs?
I mean, we like to say that everybody's doing it the first way every time, but I think
Right.
You highlight one of the dangers of this strategy as well, which is, are things truly interoperable? You know, can I pull something out if it's no longer working, if I need to move on? Safely, that's actually been true because you're buying for features and then usually running some kind of integration layer. It does allow for you to pull things out, put things in as you need, and you're not necessarily as locked in as you used to be. Generally, the pain point here becomes what imaginary line in the sand exists north of $1 billion, somewhere in that 2 to 5 billion range, where those things that made you successful now need to fall away. Call it the Peter principle of technology adoption. What got me here is not going to get me there. There is going to come a moment of reckoning, because if you've cobbled together these large mid-market solutions, they're mid-market solutions. They do what they do well, but they usually have very clearly defined squares that say up to this point, but not past it. There's probably some point, and if you are super successful, now this would be a great problem to have, but if you're super successful, you hit about the 5 billion mark. It's like, I may have to rip all of this out to bring one of the big players in, because there is now suddenly something that demands this big multinational enterprise style focus. It's not to say either strategy is bad or neither, or this path is not worth going down, but they are things that somebody should keep in the back of their mind of,
exactly.
There is going to be a sequence to this.
Yeah, there's a limit. And especially when you get to that point, it's a good problem to have, kind of like our question that we were talking about earlier, our personal discussion. But, there's going to be a time when you're going to have to make that call, and that, that it's no longer going to be this, not that it's simple. It's still complicated, but there is a point in which you have to make that call. So what are some, how are the paradigms shifting? How are they moving?
And you set this one up perfectly. So I'll just give you credit where it's due. Omnichannel. It really is about omnichannel, and it's about thinking that from the start. So omnichannel buying habits are just, now they're expected, regardless of the size of your firm. If you've crossed about, call it 20 to 25 million in revenue, you're not really a local firm anymore. You're starting to kind of grow up. You're either at the state level, you're at the national level, you might be dabbling in international. And so you just have different considerations than you probably opened your doors around. So you aren't too small for 2-day shipping. You probably are starting to feel pressure around local delivery, time windows, some of that white glove style information handling that just comes with the bigger players. If you want to be in that market, if you want to be able to steal eyeballs from them, you have to at least come up to that level that has been really set in the stand. Let's call it. It's Amazon. It's Jet, it's Walmart. They offer such high degree of, call it operational transparency that now you have to be able to compete with that, even if it's only just to the minimum viable product level. That's just indirect. Well, how do we address retail? Do you have stores? Are you experimenting with pop-ups and flash sales? Well, there are things that go on in the back of the house. People are starting to ask for buy online, pick up in store. They're thinking about ship from store. When I was growing up, before I was a professional even, it was mind blowing to me when GameStop started allowing you to log into their website, open up a store. Oh, I want this game. Well, there are 3 units and they're at the mall 6 miles down the road. That happened a lot sooner than I think people realized. I think I was doing that back in 2004. So there's a lot of this stuff that kind of was that precursor, and it was really cool, but there was still the chance of disappointment. If I saw that and that was one copy and I went down the road, what's to say a guy in the store didn't pick it up sooner?
Exactly.
So we've even added guarantees around that to say, I bought it, it's in my name, it's going to be there. That is the confidence of it.
I did that a couple weeks ago. So there was a fire pit that I wanted. I looked online. The store had it in stock, but there was a limited amount. So I bought it and did for click and collect, just because I did not want to take the chance that on that beautiful sunny Saturday, someone else in that store was going to think, oh, I need a fire pit too.
But there are cautions around that, though. And this is one I'm going to borrow from you. This is one my wife and I ran into just the other day. We were looking at some sun chairs at Costco. We're sitting in the store looking at them going, oh, okay, I can buy them here for $150. Go home, open up your phone. They wanted $400. Because what they had done was they had baked all of those supply chain costs into it. It's a bulky item. It might require some white glove treatment. And so they're like, if you want to buy this online, 1, it had to be a 2-pack. And 2, even at 2-pack rate, it was like another $150. But no, it was free pickup in store. And because we'd just been to the store, you just get this kind of disconnect of highway robbery. Like you're being taken advantage of. Now, I can appreciate it as a logistician. I literally called my wife down and went, what you don't understand is operations, shipping, pickup. They're baking their administrative costs into it. But for big items, big bulky items like that, the shift between I'm looking at a price tag versus I'm looking at my phone can be jarring. And so if there is not transparency in that, it can start feeling manipulative. It can start feeling like, yes, I will offer you everything you want for a price.
And I've noticed this also for, we were talking restaurants earlier. Now I'll talk about grocery delivery and Instacart. I use Instacart to order my groceries and just pick them up when I'm ready. I'm a busy mom. I have, work. I have a long commute. So, these things are a godsend to me. One of the benefits of COVID, I know that's a horrible thing to say, but it's a great thing that has come out of that almost every grocery store is available on Instacart now. But the prices for each individual item are higher through Instacart than they are in the store. And so that's something I have to weigh. If I'm only picking up 2 things, is it really better to order it on Instacart or just walk into the store and get those 2 or 3 things? Or for a large grocery order, and am I willing to pay an extra $15, $20 for that grocery order just for the convenience of not having to go in and go shopping? And most people, I find, are, that convenience and that customer experience is so valuable that they're willing to spend that extra money on that service that the store is providing. And God bless them for it.
But there's manipulative things that are there from when I came up as well. I think back personally to my time at Cabela's. There's positive revenue reasons that companies do this. We had a study at Cabela's that said, probably even 10 years ago, if I can make you come into the store, we used in-store pickup, call it buy online, pickup store, whatever you want to call it. If we can get you to come to the store, we put the customer service desk all the way at the back of the store. I'm not sure if you've been into a Cabela's. These things are 250,000 square feet. They're enormous. So if I can get you in, I'm going to make your order be at the entire back end of a football stadium. I'm going to make you walk the entire way across it, and I can guarantee you almost to the dollar that you're going to spend $50 getting to that back of the store, because you're going to walk by and you go, oh, I bought a fishing line. Here's a spare reel. Here's a jacket. Here's some cold weather gear. And as you're going, you're thinking, oh, I need this and I need this. I need this. It's the consumer product version of don't go to the grocery store when you're hungry.
Exactly.
You don't go to any retailer and go, well, I'm just here to buy shoes, because by the end you've walked out with a full ensemble.
Right. Yeah. And that's what happened when I picked up my fire pit at Menards. It's all the way at the back of the store. I walked through. I had to walk past cleaning supplies. Oh, I need that. Had to walk past the garden center. Oh, I really do need a planter over here. And yeah, I'm not allowed to go to Menards unsupervised anymore. It's that's my punishment. I'm not allowed to go by myself. So, but you're right. That is one way that these companies are incentivizing and trying to, I know you use the word manipulate, but to capitalize on the fact.
Encourage, incentivize. We can find positive words for it. It's psychology at the end of the day.
It is. It is all about the buying psychology. And as marketing people, we are there for it. I mean, I would have end caps on every single path to get back there just to say, oh, here's something that you forgot you needed when you walked in the store today. So I love it. I love that is something that they're doing, but that's the marketing person in me. So when we're starting to talk about some of those business models and providing that back-end support for all of those decisions that they're making, for all of those click and collects, whether they're doing the fulfillment. And maybe that's another part of this question, is doing some of that fulfillment. Yes, we're talking about the client walking into the store, or the customer walking into the store to pick up their item. What about when they just want it sent to them, and those fulfillment centers having to pivot and make sure that those customers are also receiving the same customer service levels? What's changing there?
So I think there's two parts of this one. So I'm going to break this up. One is the customer themselves, and two is the fulfillment part of the question. You'll understand here in a second. We're seeing a lot of brands that just don't think the path to success anymore is test it out online, build up capital, open a store. You know, when I owned my comic book shop, that was exactly what I did. Start on eBay, start small, justify the model. Suddenly you're in a retail store, and that was achievement. Many brands are just skipping the physical footprint. You know, they're experimenting with highly seasonal pop-ups or temp spaces. Best example, everybody knows about Spirit Halloween. You know, they show up in your mall, they're there for 2 months. Their entire business model is the entire rest of the year, they're a theater company. They are there to provide costumes. They're providing things for parties or for, putting on shows. And then 2 months out of the year, suddenly they buy up an amazing amount of retail space. You've been in one. They're minimally set up. They're designed just to create a go in, buy your stuff, get out style setup. And by the second week of November tops, they've completely vacated that space. It's an amazing model, but it requires a completely different consideration when you consider online to be your main business. You have this high degree of seasonality. You have to be successful, but now you're not required to maintain that physical footprint. So this gets to the second part of, one, what do companies really want to be? How are they addressing the market? How are they serving their customers? The second part becomes that space itself. We're seeing really interesting discussions right now around micro fulfillment, repurposing of retail footprints, strip malls that are just there. Well, it doesn't require a lot of retrofitting. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say all those empty malls from the 90s. Yeah. We've got them here in our city, and all of these retail spaces that are just nostalgic for us are empty, sitting empty. And now they're getting bought up by the most unusual, or they're getting filled by the most unusual things. Sometimes it's a dark store where you see this space in this empty ghost of a mall, but it's incredibly busy inside because they've capitalized on the fact that this space existed.
And that's where dark stores, dark DCs, it's a wonderful lexicon that we should be dug into, because oftentimes it's not the store itself. So if you're in the mall and you're seeing that shuttered operation, it's not the previous tenant. Oftentimes it is just a company that's gotten very creative and has moved in, and they're just going to leverage that space because of the existing infrastructure of the mall. They've got the delivery dock. They've got the ability to send things out. All of those things sit there in the back of the house and can be used to retrofit that space. One of our customers we're dealing with is actually a 3PL that their whole shtick is buying up this space to essentially create series of store-sized micro DCs for that purpose of dynamic and flexible fulfillment. So this also becomes one of those resources will be reallocated where they're most efficient. It's capitalism at its core concept, which says inefficiency will be worked around. Bunch of retail space not being used. Somebody's going to come in, set up their 3PL, offer it as a service. Now that is productive space again. We're seeing landlords that find that appealing as well because there's less maintenance on these things. There is a lot more longevity in the contracts. I wouldn't be surprised. We haven't seen it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a large contingent out there starting to think about the office space that is sitting open right now. And is that also suitable for setting up pop-up fulfillment operations?
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's not just so. No, I won't go there. We'll back that up. All right. So,
scary topic.
I know. A little bit too much information that's very, very specific. Never mind. All right. So how do smaller companies play in this arena? Because we're talking about large companies that can afford these spaces, these opportunities, these softwares. How do smaller companies compete?
Well, the first thing is just know the customer. Let's just start with that. Know what you want to do, know who you want to do it for, and the ability to keep an honest self-reflection of what your business is going to be should be the first part of every vision statement. Before we've gotten into the operational plan, before we've gotten into how we can do it, let's start with what we're doing and who we're doing it for. Then into what you asked, actually. It's a cliche. Let's be honest. It's a cliche, but it's constant. And there's a reason it's a constant. Is that since we've had the dawn of, say, structured business transactions, structured business relationships, you either find a way to do the same thing as your competitor and do it better, lower cost, higher quality, a little bit of both, or you just fundamentally change the game. And in the last 20 years, I think what we've seen is a shift from I want to do what they do, but do it better, to they already are doing it as best it could possibly be done. Most of the fundamental transformations we're seeing is around disruption. And that's where small businesses and mid-markets really get to thrive, is coming out and not just saying, I'm going to do that, but better, is going, I think that idea was flawed from the start. So we're seeing a lot of new technology, new products, new ways of approaching these problems. Some of them aren't going to work. The failure rate of businesses is 10%, or is 90%. The survival rate's 10. It's a very quick way to test ideas, but I think we're seeing that shift towards let's change the game entirely. And so when emerging brands are pivoting to new techniques, we're talking about, supply chains. Let's skip the point about what you do, why you do it, think in generalities. Let's go to Back to School. It's one of my favorite movies. We're talking about widgets. What's a widget? It's a thing that doesn't exist, but it has a structure behind it, something that everybody has to do. Do I run my own shop? Well, okay. Shopify, Square, eBay. There are a number of different really quick templatized websites that can be set up. You can be selling widgets overnight. I want to distribute these widgets. Do I have storefronts? Well, Amazon, eBay, Jet, Walmart, blah, 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 EMEA, all of these. Every single one of these is like point and click, put in your SKU, boom, you're listed. There is no barrier to entry because these guys get their pennies for selling your product. So I can run my own website. Now I can distribute through marketplaces. How am I going to distribute it? Well, there's 3PLs that are ready to step in. I don't have to own a warehouse anymore. I just have to run a virtual network. That could be CPG, refrigerated, white glove. Okay, well, maybe I just go with one that lets me have direct to consumer or e-commerce as part of their service offering. I have a storefront. I have marketplaces. I now have 3PL. I haven't actually touched anything. I haven't had to own a supply chain. I don't have to own anything. So you're now even getting into 3PLs that specialize in post-sale support. So one of the biggest problems with direct-to-consumer was the pullback. Does it go to my DC? Does it go to my vendor? Do I just refund it and walk away? Now we're able to work in concepts around ESG and last mile and replenishment. All of those things I just said could be virtual. You could just not own a thing. You could be orchestrating this out of your WeWork. And this allows for that flexibility to say, maybe I want to be in the widgets market and I don't have to think about owning a store, owning a distribution center, owning trucks, going out and doing these things, because we have this ecosystem of both hardware and software providers that can help you get up to speed very quickly. So I know that was a really long answer, but I really want to think about how is it going from production to sale? So if you don't want to do it, there's a provider that will step in and do it for you. They take a small cut of your revenue. They take the whole thing off your hands. to go back to, there's an old adage for this too, which is when you look at yourself, ask, what is my business? What am I actually doing? Who am I actually serving? Well, I want to sell widgets. Good. I don't care about distributing them. I don't care about selling them. I don't care about designing them. Go find a firm to do that and go back to being what you want to be. Maybe you're a manufacturer, or maybe you are good at retail. Let's outsource the manufacturing and focus on retail. You can really say, not only what do I want to do, but how much of it do I want to do, and how much is what I do genuinely value add for that customer? What adds a value, and what can I go, I have no interest in distribution. So the end point of that is everything I just said. More so than ever before, smaller firms can come, they can break in, they can create a buzz, they can gain market share, and they can thrive, because a lot of what would have been considered enterprise level maturity has been brought down market by these very nimble technology providers.
So it's now accessible to them. It's now available. And so that, I think, brings you to your final point that we discussed. And what is that?
Well, it really comes down to ultimately just fast. How fast can I do this? How fast can I create something, get it out there? Because the internet effect is real. We know that the longevity of cool has gone down a lot faster than ever before. So I can't sit here and go, oh, I'm going to go through design and putting it out. In 3 years, I have a product and somebody already copied it. We can't survive those cycles anymore. So I think that's where the best part of this comes is I can do this now. Everything we just discussed, all of these providers, technological hardware, they're clamoring for business right now. Just in the way you theorized about, the scrappy startup, they're going to go out there, they're going to do something. There are scrappy startups in the provider space. I deal with them every day that are coming to me and saying, we do this and we do it very well, and that's all we want to focus on. How do we form, partnerships around that? So I didn't really appreciate just how many small niche technologies were out there really focusing on, how are you doing your rate engine? How are you accessing the parcel marketplaces? How are you doing your TMS? And so they play well with each other. You get to build these dynamic tech stacks. And because you can now approach them all, there's a lot more things that could be parallelized in that adoption process. I don't have to go, all right, these are going to go one after the other sequentially, and 5 years down the road, I'll have a supply chain. A lot of these can be stood up by themselves with the configurations, and then you just bolt them together with that integration layer afterwards. So when we think about my company, for example, we're deploying warehouse management, distributed order management. Those can be done in as little as 90 days, depending on the complexity of the customer, of course. If you got a big sprawling network, it's longer. But for what these small businesses need, being able to go, we can come in, we can give you a distribution solution in 90 days. That is transformative for a lot of these companies when they're looking at how am I going to scale up into the mid-market. One of my other partners works on implementations. Their commitment is they can hook together two software systems, software and a hardware system, a control system and a DC. They need 12 weeks if it doesn't exist. If it does exist, it's usually 2 weeks of configuration and you're off to the races. So even as you start adopting these things, you can get the benefits of those quicker. You're not paying on day one and turning it on day 365. And now you're back to trying that finance team to justify why did you spend all of this money? So I meet a new hardware vendor that's ready to stand up in 30 days just about every week right now as I'm seeking technology partnerships. It really is just a wild time to live in, because that cycle time between inking the contract, deploying the system, generating ROI, and then looping back to go, okay, now what other holes do I have in my tech stack? This can become a very big game changer in the operations space. So this is really benefiting firms. They don't feel like they have to make trade-offs anymore between with or without, buy this system, don't buy this system. They don't feel they're overbuying features they'll need in that 5-year timeline you said. And maybe I don't hit the growth milestones and now I'm underwater. So they buy what they need now. They build a more responsible acquisition timeline that says, good, in 12 months, we're going to look at this again. In 12 months, we're going to look at this again. And it becomes you bring continuous improvement mindset into acquisition methodologies instead of a 5 to 10 year cycle of capital expenditure of research and research and research and delayed decisions and research, and up the window of opportunity is passed. This allows for that nimbleness that allows for small business and mid-market to be able to compete and to be able to do so successfully. So you said my last question, my last point. So I always have to flip this around. Everything I've walked you through, from providers to time to value to the changing kind of consumer sentiment, it really becomes, what market disruptive idea have you been sitting on? Where is your widget? What can you take out into the world? Because if your answer was, I don't have the money, I don't have the resources, I don't have the back end, all of these things can be stood up very economically sensibly to allow for these disruptive ideas to get out there. So it's never been easier to have your idea, identify your specific clientele, and then reach them in a very surgical manner.
Fantastic. I love it. I love that this agility is allowing for all of these new ideas, new products to reach markets that they never would have dreamed of being able to do a decade ago. I think it's fantastic. And it's only going to benefit the consumer in the end to have that amount of choice.
100%. That's really what it comes down to, is the customer is going to decide where they're going to put their money. You can either accept that. And I say that accept, I probably skipped a point there. I hear a lot of pushback on, well, I don't want to do it this way. I don't want to do it that way. And the answer is, it's not your choice anymore. Consumers are enjoying an amazing period of voice of the customer driving the decisions of these firms. And frankly, if you don't want to do it, I guarantee there's a startup that's going to be there next week that's going to go, that's great, we want those customers. So you don't get to say, I'm the big gargantuan retailer and I'm going to define the way the customer is going to interact with me, because the internet has allowed them to say, no, that's great, I'm going to go back to the mom and pop who is willing to deliver a very tailored, targeted experience for exactly what you need. You just have to be willing to seek those providers out.
Exactly. Well, you know what? One of my favorite things about our conversation today is that everything we talked about kind of went back to, or where we ended up with this, what is your idea? How would you do this? What would you focus on if you're the company, if you don't want to have to do this, if you want to outsource these other things that you don't want to do? It all comes back to the conversation that we had that is only available on our gated content on YouTube. So if you are not a subscriber to Speaking of Supply Chain through our website, you really should be, because it all ties back together of really focusing in on what your dreams are and what you hope to achieve and making it happen and getting rid of all the rest. It was perfect, our discussion today. It fits in absolutely, and it gives me the chance to promote our additional content. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. That's wonderful.
Thank you for getting to hear the science behind what I do, part of the academic that I discussed at the front of it, because at the end of the day, there's never really been a better time to be in logistics. It's just so exciting to see the rate of change, the implementation of new technology, and then that core theme of, but it's not inaccessible. It's out there if you want it. You can build the supply chain you want. And that's probably the best thing for our economy, for customer service, for continuing to keep all of this goods flowing. Is there's just such a vibrant ecosystem that I don't even think was there 5 years ago.
It really is. And it's like you said, we've worked with each other for years now in different areas, but we are marketing people, and we've had numerous discussions, numerous interactions over the years, and it's gotten so much more fun these past few years.
Well, I mean, or your corollary to that, the subtext is, if this isn't exciting to you, if this isn't such a transformative moment in the market, are you really excited by logistics?
Right. Yeah. And
are you really are you really driven by supply chains? Because if you are, this should just be a great time
thrilling.
To be a logistician.
Well, and clearly you and I are the nerds who are excited about this, so that's fine. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun. I hope it's been informational for our guests who are listening in. And, like I said, if you are interested in these little side conversations that I've been alluding to throughout my conversation today with Joe, please do go to mebach.com/podcast and subscribe to it so that you can get access to that gated content as well. If you are listening out there and you would like to be a guest on our podcast and tell us a little bit about your story, tell us a little bit about what you're passionate about in supply chain, feel free. Email me anytime at podcast@mebach.com. As always, thank you for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. Please rate and review, and be sure to tune in next time.